Sarah sat on the cold metal floor of the holding cell, her back against the wall. The alien facility hummed around her with sounds she didn't recognize. 3 days ago, she'd been captain of a small freighter hauling mining equipment through what she thought was open space. Then the patrol ships had surrounded her vessel, and everything had gone wrong very fast. Now she was here, wherever here was. The cell was large and empty, with smooth walls that glowed with a faint blue light. Cameras watched her from every angle. She could feel eyes on her constantly, studying her like a bug under glass. The door hissed open. Sarah stood up slowly, keeping her hands visible. She'd learned quickly that sudden movements made the guards nervous, but no guards entered. Instead, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a chittering, clicking noise that definitely came from something alive. 3 creatures tumbled into the cell. The door slammed shut behind them. Sarah's breath caught. The creatures were like nothing she'd ever seen. They were about the size of large dogs, with 6 legs and bodies covered in something between fur and scales. Their heads were broad and flat, with too many eyes that glinted in the blue light. Each paw ended in curved claws that scraped against the metal floor. Their mouths held rows of sharp teeth that they displayed as they hissed and growled. The creatures spread out, moving with the coordinated precision of pack hunters. Sarah's mind raced. This was a test. It had to be. They wanted to see something. Maybe they wanted to see her fight. Maybe they wanted to see her die. She sat back down on the floor. The movement surprised the creatures. They froze, their many eyes fixed on her. Sarah crossed her legs and rested her hands in her lap. She kept her breathing slow and steady, even though her heart hammered in her chest. "Hey there," she said softly. "You're scared, aren't you?" The creatures didn't understand her words, but they cocked their heads at the sound of her voice. One of them, slightly smaller than the others, took a tentative step forward. Sarah noticed it was limping. "It's okay," Sarah continued in the same gentle tone. "I'm scared too. This place is awful, isn't it? All these lights and sounds and strangers." The small one moved closer. Its companions chittered nervously but didn't follow. Sarah remained perfectly still, watching the creature's body language. She'd spent years on frontier stations, working with animals of all kinds. Horses, dogs, even the 6-legged mules they used on Mars. Animals spoke with their bodies, and if you knew how to listen, you could understand them. This creature was terrified. Its movements were stiff and jerky. It kept looking back at its companions for reassurance. But it was also curious, drawn to Sarah's calm presence in this frightening place. Sarah extended one hand slowly, palm up, fingers relaxed. She turned her head slightly to the side, avoiding direct eye contact. In many species, direct staring was a challenge or a threat. The creature sniffed the air. It moved close enough that Sarah could see the details of its face. Its eyes were actually quite expressive, she realized. Right now they showed fear and confusion and a desperate need for comfort. "That's it," Sarah whispered. "I won't hurt you, I promise." The creature touched its nose to her palm. Its nose was cold and slightly damp. Sarah felt it exhale against her skin, testing her scent. Then slowly, the creature pressed its head into her hand. Sarah began to stroke its head gently, running her fingers along the ridge above its eyes. The creature made a sound she hadn't heard before, a low, rumbling vibration that came from deep in its chest. It was purring. The other 2 creatures saw their companion relax and their postures changed. They approached more confidently, drawn by the sight of one of their own finding comfort. Within minutes, all 3 were pressed against Sarah, seeking warmth and reassurance. Sarah examined them carefully as she petted them. They were young, she realized. Juveniles, probably separated from their mother too early. The small one had a cut on its back leg that looked infected. Another had scars on its face. The third was thin, its ribs visible under its fur scales. "You poor bobbies," Sarah murmured. "Who's been hurting you?" She pulled her jacket around herself and let the creatures cuddle closer. They were surprisingly warm, and their purring filled the quiet cell with a soothing sound. One of them rested its head on her lap. Another curled up against her side. The small injured one pressed close to her chest, where her heartbeat was strongest. Sarah looked up at the nearest camera. "I don't know what you wanted to see," she said clearly, "but these aren't monsters, they're just bobbies who need help." Outside the cell, in an observation room filled with monitors and recording equipment, Doctor stared at the screens in disbelief. His scales had gone pale with shock. Around him, a dozen other scientists from various species stood equally stunned. "This is impossible," whispered the facility's veterinarian. Her antennae were rigid with surprise. "Cubs are born with full hunting instincts. They've killed trained handlers. They've killed each other when they got too hungry or too stressed." "And yet," Doctor said slowly, "look at them." On the screen, the three cubs were completely relaxed. One had rolled onto its back, exposing its vulnerable belly while the human scratched its chest. The purring was loud enough to register on the audio sensors. "Check the readings again," Doctor ordered. An assistant checked the data. "Confirmed, sir. The cubs' stress hormones have dropped by 70%. Their heart rates are normal. Brain scans show patterns consistent with contentment." "What is she doing?" someone asked. Doctor enhanced the video, zooming in on the human's face. She looked calm, not triumphant like a warrior who dominated an enemy, not calculating like a predator who'd found prey. She just looked kind. "She's comforting them," said quietly. "She sees them as young creatures who need care, not as weapons or threats." "But our apex predators," another scientist argued. "One of the most dangerous species in known space. Even their young are deadly. Humans are supposed to be intelligent predators themselves. Why isn't she responding to the threat?" Doctor pulled up the human's file on his tablet. "The intelligence we gathered on humans suggested they were Category 5 threats. Aggressive, territorial, with a history of violence toward their own kind. We designed this test to reveal their predatory nature." "Perhaps our intelligence was wrong," suggested. "Or perhaps," Doctor said slowly, "we misunderstood what we were seeing." He began searching the human databases that had been gathered during initial surveillance of Earth. Most of it was basic information, language, biology, culture. But as he dug deeper, he found something interesting. A word that appeared over and over in human records: pets. Doctor's eyes widened as he read. Humans lived with other species, dozens of them. They brought predators into their homes, creatures called dogs that were descended from wolves, one of Earth's apex predators. They kept small hunting animals called cats. Some kept reptiles, birds, even insects. They didn't just tolerate these creatures. They loved them. "Look at this," he said, projecting an image to the main screen. It showed a human child sleeping in a bed, curled up with a large canine creature that had its teeth bared in what the caption called a smile. The room fell silent. "They domesticate predators," Doctor continued, scrolling through more images. "They've been doing it for thousands of years. They form emotional bonds with creatures that could kill them. They have a word for it: empathy. It means the ability to understand and share the feelings of another being. And apparently, humans don't limit this empathy to their own species." On the screen in the holding cell, Sarah had noticed the injured cub's leg wound. She was examining it carefully, making soothing sounds as the cub flinched. She tore a strip of cloth from her shirt and wrapped it gently around the wound, using her shoelace to tie it in place. "She's providing medical care," observed. "Without tools or training in physiology, she's still trying to help." Doctor made a decision. He activated the communication panel to the cell. "Human, can you hear me?" Sarah looked up at the ceiling. "I can hear you." "What are you doing?" "This little one has an infected cut. It needs antibiotics and proper cleaning. The others are malnourished. They need food, water, and a safe place to rest. If you're going to keep them here, you need to take better care of them." Her tone wasn't angry. It was matter of fact, almost professional. She spoke like someone who expected to be listened to, not like a prisoner begging for mercy. "They are dangerous predators," Doctor said. "We keep them for research purposes." "They're bobbies," Sarah replied firmly. "And they're suffering. That's not research, that's cruelty." Several scientists in the observation room shifted uncomfortably. Antenna drooped with what might have been shame. Doctor studied the human. She had positioned herself to shield the cubs from the cameras, as if protecting them from the watcher's eyes. The cubs trusted her completely now, their bodies relaxed against hers. "We need to run more tests," he said carefully, "to understand what you are." "What I am," Sarah said, "is someone who knows scared kids when she sees them. Whatever you think you're testing, you're wrong. Now are you going to help these cubs, or am I going to have to do it myself?" Doctor turned to his colleagues. "Initiate Protocol 7. His assistant's voice shook. "Sir, Protocol 7 means bringing in an adult, the battle-scarred male from the fighting ring confiscations. He's killed 17 handlers." "I know what it means," Doctor said quietly. He looked at the screen, where the human sat with 3 deadly predators purring in her lap like harmless pets. "We need to understand what humans truly are before Earth makes official contact with the Galactic Council. If she can do this with cubs, we need to know what happens with an adult." The room erupted in protests, but Doctor silenced them with a gesture. "The human said we're wrong about our tests. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps this isn't about revealing her predatory nature. Perhaps it's about understanding something we've never encountered before." He authorized the protocol, his hand trembling slightly as he pressed the confirmation button. In the holding cell, Sarah continued to comfort the cubs, unaware that her greatest challenge was about to begin. Doctor watched the screens and wondered if he had just ordered the human's death, or if he was about to witness something that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence, empathy, and the nature of consciousness itself. The adult was being prepared for transport. Soon, they would have their answer. Sarah felt the change before she saw it. The 3 cubs suddenly became alert, their heads snapping toward the door. Their purring stopped. Their bodies went rigid with tension. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. The cubs moved closer to her, pressing themselves against her body. They made soft, worried chirping sounds. Whatever was coming, they were afraid of it. The door hissed open. The cubs scrambled behind Sarah, using her as a shield. She felt their claws dig into her clothes as they held onto her. The creature that entered the cell was massive. It was easily 3 times the size of the cubs, with scars crisscrossing its body. One of its eyes was milky white, blind. Its front left leg moved stiffly, suggesting an old injury that had never healed properly. Its claws were chipped and worn. When it opened its mouth, Sarah saw that one of its long fangs was broken off at the base. This was a fighter, a survivor of terrible things, and it was staring directly at her. Sarah's mouth went dry. The cubs were chirping frantically now, their fear obvious. The adult took a step forward, and Sarah realized with absolute clarity that she was about to die. But she also realized something else. The adult wasn't moving like a predator stalking prey. Its movements were stiff and mechanical, like an animal that had been trained through pain to behave a certain way. Its body told a story of abuse and violence. Its blind eye and broken fang spoke of fights it hadn't wanted but had been forced into. Sarah knew that look. She'd seen it before in animals rescued from fighting rings back on Earth, dogs that had been beaten into aggression, horses that had been broken by cruelty. This wasn't a monster. This was a victim. She stood up slowly, keeping her movements smooth and predictable. The cubs clung to her legs, but she gently detached them and positioned herself between them and the adult. The adult tensed, ready to attack or defend. Its muscles bunched under its hide. Sarah sat down. right there in the middle of the cell with a deadly predator just a few meters away. She sat cross-legged, rested her hands in her lap, and turned her head to the side. She made herself small and non-threatening. Then she waited. In the observation room, the silence was absolute. Every eye was fixed on the monitors. Had her medical team on standby, ready to rush in the moment the human fell. But the attack didn't come. The adult stood motionless, confused by behavior it had never encountered. Prey ran, enemies fought, but this creature did neither. It simply sat, calm and patient, offering no challenge and showing no fear. Minutes passed, then an hour. Sarah didn't move except to breathe. The cubs huddled behind her, occasionally peeking around her shoulders to watch the adult. The adult remained frozen, locked in some internal struggle. Sarah could feel her legs going numb from sitting so still, but she didn't shift position. She understood what was happening. The adult had been trained to respond to violence, to threats with aggression. But she was offering neither. She was breaking the pattern that had been beaten into it, and the creature didn't know how to respond. After 2 hours, the adult took a step forward, then another. It moved slowly, carefully, circling around Sarah at a distance. She kept her eyes lowered, her posture relaxed. She projected calm with every line of her body. The adult came closer, close enough that Sarah could smell it, a sharp, musky scent mixed with old blood and infection, close enough that she could hear its breathing, raspy and uneven. It had lung damage, she realized, probably from being kept in poor conditions. The adult sniffed her hair. Its breath was hot on her neck. One swipe of its claws could open her throat. One bite could crush her skull. Sarah slowly reached into her pocket. In the observation room, alarms blared. Doctor leaped toward the emergency override button, ready to flood the cell with tranquilizer gas. But Sarah only pulled out a handful of food pellets, the bland, dry rations they'd been feeding her. She'd saved them from yesterday, tucking them away without really knowing why. Now she understood. Some part of her had known she might need them. She held out her hand, palm flat, the pellets visible, an offering, not a threat. The adult stared at her hand. It made a sound, low and confused. Then slowly it lowered its head and ate from her palm. Its tongue was rough against her skin. Its teeth brushed her fingers but didn't bite. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's it," she whispered. "That's it. Nobody's going to hurt you here, I promise." The adult finished the pellets. It stood there for a long moment, and Sarah could see something happening in its remaining good eye, some internal wall crumbling, some old pain beginning to ease. Then the adult lay down, right there next to Sarah, close enough that she could feel its body heat. It lowered its massive head to the floor and let out a long, shuddering breath. The cubs chirped excitedly. They crept forward, hesitant at first, then more boldly. The adult turned its head to watch them but didn't growl or snap. When the smallest cub, the injured one, approached, the adult sniffed it gently. Sarah slowly extended her hand and touched the adult's shoulder. It flinched but didn't pull away. She began to carefully examine its wounds, years of damage layered on top of each other, old cuts that had healed badly, burns from shock prods, evidence of systematic, deliberate cruelty. "What did they do to you?" she murmured. The adult watched her with its one good eye. Sarah began to gently probe its injuries, checking for infections and broken bones that had set wrong. The adult endured her examination without complaint, as if it understood she was trying to help. The cubs, seeing the adult accept Sarah's touch, became braver. They approached and began grooming the adult's fur, licking the scars with their small tongues. The adult made that rumbling purr sound, and the cubs joined in. Soon the cell was filled with the sound of multiple purring in harmony. Sarah settled back against the wall, and the adult rested its head on her lap. The cubs curled up around them both. Within minutes, all four were asleep, their breathing deep and even, peaceful. Sarah stroked the adult's head and stared up at the cameras. "I hope you learned something," she said quietly. "Because I did. You had one of the most magnificent creatures I've ever seen and you broke it. You turned something beautiful into something broken. That's not science. That's evil." In the observation room, Doctor couldn't speak. Around him, his colleagues were equally silent. They had just watched a human do the impossible, and none of them could explain it. Finally spoke. "We need to help them, the cubs, the adult, they need proper medical care. We've been," she struggled with the words, "we've been wrong about so many things." Doctor nodded slowly. He opened a communication channel. "Human, this is Doctor. I am authorizing our medical specialist to enter the cell. She will provide treatment for the, will you allow this?" Sarah looked at the 4 sleeping predators around her. "Only if she's gentle. They've been hurt enough." "I understand. I also want you to know," Doctor paused, choosing his words carefully. "We were wrong about the test, about what we hoped to learn. You are not what we expected." "No," Sarah said softly, still stroking the adult's head. "I'm exactly what you should have expected. I'm human. We've been doing this for thousands of years, seeing past the teeth and claws to the person underneath. Every dog on Earth is descended from wolves that someone like me sat down next to and offered food to. We don't conquer predators. We befriend them." She looked directly at the camera, and Doctor felt the weight of her gaze even through the monitor. "The question isn't what I am. The question is, what are you going to do now? Are you going to keep torturing these beautiful creatures, or are you going to do better?" Doctor looked around the observation room at his colleagues. He saw shame on their faces and recognition. They had become so focused on studying threats that they had forgotten compassion. "We will do better," he said quietly. "I promise you, human, we will do better." As prepared her medical supplies and sterilized her equipment, Doctor began accessing the databases again. He needed to understand Earth, needed to understand humans. If one human could do this with no tools and no training, what could humanity accomplish if they were properly welcomed into the galactic community? Or a darker thought occurred to him. What if humans decided the galaxy wasn't worth joining? What if they looked at how species like his treated other creatures and decided to keep their distance? He needed to learn everything he could about Earth and its people. But first, he needed to figure out what to do with one very unusual human and her pack of deadly predators who now followed her like devoted pets. The galaxy, Doctor realized, was about to change, and humanity would be the catalyst. 3 weeks had passed since the test. Sarah's cell had been transformed into something more comfortable, a larger space with soft surfaces for them to rest on, proper lighting that didn't hurt their sensitive eyes, and temperature controls that kept them comfortable. Visited twice daily to continue treating the adult's injuries and monitor the cub's recovery. They had bonded to Sarah completely. The cubs followed her everywhere, chirping for attention. The adult, whom Sarah had named for the silver scarring across his shoulders, rarely left her side. At night, he slept pressed against the door, guarding her even though there was no threat. Sarah had become an accidental celebrity within the facility. Scientists from dozens of species found excuses to walk past her cell, hopping to catch a glimpse of the human who had tamed with nothing but patience and kindness. Some looked at her with wonder, others with suspicion, a few with fear. Doctor had spent those 3 weeks buried in research. The more he learned about Earth, the more fascinated and terrified he became. Humans had domesticated over 40 species of animals. They had formed working partnerships with even more. They kept dangerous predators as companions, not because they controlled them, but because they understood them. But what truly shocked him was human history. Yes, humans fought wars. Yes, they could be violent. But they also had animal hospitals, wildlife sanctuaries, and laws protecting endangered species. They spent enormous resources saving creatures that had no economic value, simply because they believed those creatures deserved to live. They mourned animals like they mourned their own family members. Humans, Doctor was beginning to understand, had empathy that transcended species boundaries. It was their greatest strength and potentially the galaxy's greatest hope. But first, he had to convince the Galactic Council to see what he saw. That opportunity came sooner than expected, but not in a way anyone wanted. The emergency alert screamed through the facility at local midnight. Doctor jerked awake in his quarters and grabbed his communicator. "What's happening?" "Sir, we have a priority distress call. Colony ship Bright Wing has crashed on Telos 4. 500 passengers, mostly children on a school transport. They're trapped in the wreckage." Doctor felt his blood go cold. "What's their status?" "Hull integrity compromised but holding. Minor injuries reported." "But sir," the operator's voice shook, "Telos 4 has a wild infestation. The crash landed right in the middle of their territory. We're reading at least 30 adults surrounding the wreckage. The rescue teams can't land without starting a feeding frenzy." Doctor was already running toward the command center, pulling on his uniform as he went. "Evacuate through the breach points. Set up defensive perimeters." "Already tried, sir. They are too aggressive." 3 rescue shuttles attempted landing. All 3 were driven back. One had its landing gear torn off. "If we force an insertion, the resulting violence will likely collapse the remaining hull structure. The children will be killed." Doctor burst into the command center. The main screen showed aerial footage of the crash site. The colony ship had plowed through a forest, leaving a trail of destruction. It sat at an awkward angle, clearly unstable. Around it, he could see movement in the trees, large shapes circling, waiting. "Options," he demanded. The tactical officer looked grim. "Military assault. Drop troops from high altitude, clear them with heavy weapons, evacuate survivors before the hull collapses. Estimated success rate, 40%. Estimated civilian casualties, high." "That's not acceptable." "It's all we have, sir. Can't be reasoned with. They're apex predators operating on instinct. The presence of the humans inside the ship is triggering their hunting behavior. It's only a matter of time before they breach the hull and—" "Wait," Doctor turned to his assistant. "Where is the human, Sarah?" "In her cell, sir. I believe she's asleep." "Wake her, bring her here, now." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, I don't understand." "The human can communicate with. She's done it with 4. Maybe she can do it with more." The tactical officer's scales flushed with disbelief. "You want to send a prisoner to handle a military crisis? A human who's been here less than a month? That's insane." "Do you have a better idea?" Doctor asked sharply. "One that doesn't involve killing children?" "Silence. Get the human, get her too, and prepare a transport. We're running out of time." 10 minutes later, Sarah stood in the command center wearing borrowed clothes, with at her side and the 3 cubs pressed against her legs. She'd been pulled from sleep and told the situation in rapid, urgent phrases. Now she stared at the monitor showing the crashed ship. "How many children?" she asked. 483, Doctor said, plus 17 adult staff members, all. "And you can't get them out because of the—" "Correct. We were about to order a military assault, but the casualties, both civilian and would be significant." Sarah looked at him. "You're asking me to try to control wild." "I'm asking you to do what you do, to see past the predators to the thinking beings underneath, to find a way to communicate that violence isn't necessary." "I could die." "Yes." "The cubs could die, could die." "Yes." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, pressed his head against her hand, and she stroked his fur absently. The cubs chirped softly, sensing her tension. "Why should I help you?" she asked. "You kidnapped me. You've kept me prisoner. You used these beautiful creatures as weapons to test me. Why would I risk everything for people who done nothing but hurt me?" Doctor met her eyes. "Because that's who you are. You saved the even though they could have killed you. You helped even though he was a stranger who'd been trained to be violent. You're human, and apparently humans don't let innocent beings suffer if they can prevent it, regardless of personal cost. Sarah smiled without humor. You've been studying us. I've been trying to understand you. I think I'm beginning to. Sarah looked back at the monitor. She could see movement inside the crashed ship through the broken windows, small shapes huddled together, terrified. Children. Bobbies, really, from a species she'd never met, in danger from creatures she barely knew how to handle. If I do this, she said slowly, things change. You release me. You stop your research on you treat them with respect, and you leave Earth alone until humanity is ready to make contact on our terms. I don't have the authority. Then get someone who does, Sarah interrupted. Because I'm not moving until I have guarantees. I won't save your children just so you can go back to torturing mine. Doctor looked at her, and for the first time, he truly understood what humans meant when they talked about moral courage. This small, physically weak creature was negotiating from a position of complete disadvantage, demanding justice even as children died. I'll contact the council, he said, but we don't have much time. Then I suggest you talk fast. The next 15 minutes were the longest of Doctor's life. He explained the situation to the Galactic Council, transmitted recordings of Sarah and argued passionately for humanity's unique capabilities. The council was skeptical, angry at being woken in the night, and deeply uncertain about trusting such an important mission to an unknown species. But they also had no better options, and the clock was ticking. Finally, the council's representative spoke. If the human succeeds, we will agree to her terms. She will be released, yet your facility will be relocated to a proper sanctuary. An official first contact with Earth will be delayed until their governments are ready. But if she fails and children die because we trusted her, there will be consequences. Understood, Doctor said. He turned to Sarah. You have your deal. Sarah nodded. She knelt down and pressed her forehead against his head. She whispered something to him that the translators didn't catch. Then she stood up. Let's go save some kids. The transport flight took 30 minutes. Sarah spent that time in the cargo bay with her, preparing herself mentally for what was coming. Sat with her, explaining children's behavior patterns and what sounds might frighten them. They'll be terrified, said, probably screaming. The sound might trigger the wild hunting instincts. Then we'll have to work fast, Sarah said. She looked at the cubs. I don't know if you understand me, but we're about to do something dangerous. There are bobbies out there who need help. Others are surrounding them, and we need to convince those to let the bobbies go free. Can you help me? Made a low rumbling sound. The cubs chirped and pressed against her legs. Sarah took that as agreement. The transport landed as far from the crash site as safely possible. Sarah stepped out onto alien soil for the first time with her small pack beside her. Through the trees ahead, she could see the crashed ship. She could hear sounds too, the chittering calls of wild communicating with each other, and underneath that, the faint sounds of crying children. Doctor's voice came through the communicator clipped to her collar. We have drones overhead. Military teams are standing by. If things go wrong. If things go wrong, don't send in the military, Sarah said. That'll just make it worse. Trust me to handle this. I do trust you, Doctor said, and he was surprised to realize it was true. Good luck, human. Sarah started walking toward the crash site. Moved beside her, his posture alert but not aggressive. The cubs followed close behind, looking around nervously at the unfamiliar environment. The forest was eerily quiet. The wild had gone silent, watching the newcomers. Sarah could feel eyes on her from every direction. Her heart hammered, but she kept her breathing steady and her movements calm. She stopped at the edge of the clearing where the ship had crashed. The wreckage was worse up close. The hull had crumpled like paper, and Sarah could see injured people through the broken windows. Children's faces pressed against the glass, watching her with wide, terrified eyes. Around the ship, the wild emerged from the trees. There were dozens of them, all adults, all battle-scarred and powerful. They were larger than, their bodies unmarked by the specific injuries of captivity but marked instead by the hard life of the wild. They moved with the coordinated precision of an experienced hunting pack. Sarah sat down in the middle of the clearing, right there, in full view of predators and prey alike, and the cubs positioned themselves around her, visible but not threatening. And then Sarah began to wait. The wild were confused. This creature smelled like prey but behaved like neither prey nor predator. The smaller with her showed no fear, which suggested this creature was not a threat, but they'd never encountered anything like her before. One of the wild, the pack alpha, judging by its size and bearing, approached slowly. Sarah kept her eyes down and her posture relaxed. She could see it in her peripheral vision, massive and powerful, moving with the confidence of an apex predator. The alpha sniffed her. Its nose was cold against her neck. Sarah controlled her breathing and remained perfectly still. Made a sound, not aggressive but communicative. The alpha turned its attention to him. The two adults studied each other, and Sarah realized they were having a conversation of sorts, exchanging information through body language and sounds she couldn't fully interpret. The cubs chirped nervously. The alpha looked at them and its posture softened slightly. Cubs were cubs, apparently, even across different packs. The universal language of youth and vulnerability. Sarah slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out food rations. She'd brought all she had. She placed them on the ground in front of her, an offering. Then she gestured toward the crashed ship and made soothing sounds, trying to communicate peaceful intent. The alpha watched her for a long moment. Then it did something Sarah hadn't expected. It sat down. Not in the aggressive posture of a predator about to pounce, but in the relaxed posture of a creature willing to listen. Behind it, the rest of the pack waited, taking cues from their leader. Sarah began to talk. She didn't know if they understood her words, but she knew tone mattered. She spoke calmly and soothingly, explaining about the children in the ship, about their fear and their need to get to safety. She talked about how they weren't bad or wrong.